The echo within. When someone wakes your sleeping self, they say some people come into your life and change everything. But what if it's not them you remember? What if it's the part of yourself they quietly awakened? This isn't about heartbreak or longing. It's about an awakening that rattles your core, refusing to let you return to your former self. It's not because of profound words or extraordinary actions on their part. It's because their presence stirred a buried truth inside you. A part of you that had been dormant until they arrived. The inner citadel and unseen truths. The Stoics spoke of the inner citadel, that sacred, untouchable center within each of us. Most people journey through life without ever stepping inside it. Yet every now and then someone crosses your path. They don't knock, they simply speak to what already resides within. In that moment, you don't just see them, you see yourself, perhaps for the very first time. This is the kind of presence we're exploring today, the kind that endures because it never existed on the surface. It lived deep in the soul. If you've ever felt someone linger in your thoughts long after they've exited your life, if you've ever wondered why a seemingly brief connection refused to quietly fade, stay with me. What we're discussing isn't romance, it's recognition. If this resonates, if this space stirs something real and rare within you, there's a small favor I'll ask. Hit that subscribe button. You'll join a community that values presence over performance, depth over noise, and real conversations rooted in clarity, meaning, and a touch of stoic wisdom. Now, let's delve deeper. Why some connections linger? Why does someone remain within us even after their story ends? Long after the last word is spoken, long after life has moved on, they're still there, quietly, invisibly, yet undeniably present. It's not due to an unread message or a moment lacking closure. It's because the connection wasn't forged on the surface. You didn't merely cross paths, you entered something far deeper beneath logic, beneath labels, into the space where meaning lives. Carl Jung once described the unconscious as a reservoir not only of forgotten memories but of truths that were never fully perceived in the first place. When a presence stirs that reservoir, when it awakens something that had been dormant for years, you don't just become part of someone's story, you become part of their structure. Not merely a name or a face, but a symbol, a living memory of what was once buried and now refuses to be silenced again. And that's the essence of it. It's not about time spent or words exchanged. Sometimes, it's not even about what you explicitly shared. It's about how your presence landed within them, how it resonated in parts of their being they rarely acknowledged. That's why we don't always remember the loudest person or the one who stayed the longest. We remember the one who struck the deepest chord, the one whose silence echoes as loudly as their words once did. The soul's memory in Unforgettable Shifts. Plato stated that every soul has a companion, cut from the same whole, longing for reunion. While not every connection is eternal, some feel as though they stretch across time, as if you weren't meeting them for the first time but remembering them. That inexplicable sense of familiarity, the comfort in their presence requiring no explanation. These aren't accidents. These are moments when something ancient recognizes itself in another. So, when you awaken that feeling in someone, when you reflect something they didn't know they'd hidden, you don't just pass through, you remain. Perhaps not physically, perhaps not publicly, but emotionally, psychologically, soulfully. Because to them, you weren't just another person. You were the one who made them feel both at home and disrupted simultaneously. Socrates once said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Yet, not everyone is ready to examine their life until someone comes along and shines a light into those dark corners. You didn't do it intentionally. You were simply being yourself. Yet somehow your energy challenged them. It brought clarity or confusion or both. And that friction doesn't fade easily, for it's the kind of friction that creates movement. The kind that makes people question who they are and who they could become. This is the kind of presence that endures, the one that lives beyond logic, the one that lingers in someone's quiet thoughts. Not because they're clinging to the past, but because they're still trying to comprehend what you revealed. You didn't offer answers, you offered a mirror, a glimpse into a version of themselves they hadn't yet dared to confront. Sometimes, self-discovery doesn't begin in solitude, it begins with someone else. Someone who doesn't just see your surface but speaks to your depth without even trying. You became that catalyst. Not a teacher, not a savior, but a spark. And once the soul has been sparked, it doesn't easily return to sleep. The resonance of absence and unfolding truths, even when they're gone, even when you've moved in different directions, that energy doesn't vanish. Resonance isn't governed by distance, it's governed by memory, by meaning, by the quiet unfolding of something far grander than words. You became part of their unfolding, part of a journey they didn't know they were on until you crossed their path. Perhaps they'll never tell you. Perhaps they don't even fully grasp it themselves. But something shifted, something moved. And in that movement, you became unforgettable. Not because you tried to be, but because your presence reached a place they hadn't yet explored. And now that place has a name, yours. This kind of connection doesn't arrive gently. It doesn't ask for permission or await the perfect timing. It slips in unnoticed, like a breeze through a half-open window, then echoes like thunder across the quiet chambers of someone's soul. One moment, they feel steady, composed, in control. The next, they're unsettled, not by chaos, but by clarity. Because something in your presence touched a part of them that wasn't prepared to feel it. It wasn't your words that moved them. It was what those words carried, the silence between sentences, the way you simply existed without performing. That's where the shift occurred, in the unspoken, the energy they felt in the room with you. It wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Something deep stirred, and from that moment, even if everything outwardly remained the same, their inner world had already begun to transform. You didn't offer them ease, you offered them a mirror, and that mirror didn't reflect who they pretended to be, or who they had convinced the world they were. It showed them something raw, something they'd hidden even from themselves, their fragility, their quiet hunger for connection, the ache of being unseen for so long, even amidst crowds. Facing the soul, disruption and integration. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And that's why your presence felt so disruptive. You didn't give them something to chase, you gave them something to face. For someone who'd spent their life staying distracted, that kind of presence can feel overwhelming. Not because it's harmful, but because it's honest. They may not even realize it immediately. The impact of genuine presence is rarely instantaneous. It seeps in like water into parched earth, sinking beneath the surface, and suddenly, the things that once satisfied them no longer do. Conversations that used to entertain feel hollow. The roles they once played begin to feel like costumes. Because now they've glimpsed something else, something deeper, and you were the one who held up the lens. Plato once said that the soul remembers truth. It doesn't learn it, it remembers. That's what your energy did. It reminded them not necessarily of you, but of a version of themselves they hadn't felt in a long time. The one before the layers, before the performance, before the armor. That memory is what lingers. That feeling is what won't let them rest. You didn't achieve this through intensity or force. You did it simply by being. And in that being, they were confronted with their own emptiness. Not as a judgment, but as an invitation to slow down, to look inward, to reconnect. Aristotle believed that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. But very few people are brave enough to begin until someone comes along and unknowingly provides the first piece of the puzzle. That's why your presence stayed. That's why they can't forget. Because it wasn't just emotional, it was transformational. And the soul doesn't release what awakens it. It doesn't care if it's convenient, logical, or easily explained. It holds on to the people, the moments, the energies that cracked it open, even just a little. You didn't just step into their life, you stepped into their internal world. And you didn't rearrange it with your hands, you shifted it with your essence. Not with noise, but with depth, not with promises, but with reflection. And once someone sees who they truly are in your eyes, it's nearly impossible for them to revert to who they were. Even if they try to forget, even if they pretend it didn't matter, something changed, and deep down, they know it. Because in your presence, they didn't feel compelled to explain themselves, they just were. And that kind of safety, that kind of resonance persists, quietly, persistently. Because once you've been truly seen, it's hard to unfeel it. And once someone has seen themselves through you, it's even harder to forget. The unseen imprint, avoiding truth and lingering impact. They'll try to rationalize it away, telling themselves it was a fleeting feeling, something they imagined or misread. They might even articulate it aloud with confidence, as if repetition makes it true. But the soul isn't concerned with explanations. It doesn't operate through reason or logic. It operates through recognition. And once something is seen, it cannot be unseen. You didn't just enter their life, you entered their awareness. And what you touched wasn't their mind, but something far more sacred and far more sensitive. You didn't complete them. That's the common misconception. Thinking deep connection is about filling a void. What truly happened is this: you exposed the void. You didn't fix it or heal it, you revealed it. And that's why your presence mattered so much. Because in you, they saw the outline of something they hadn't known they were missing. Not a person, not a relationship, but a piece of themselves. The piece they'd avoided, the one they'd spent years distracting themselves from. This realization doesn't always bring people closer. Sometimes it pushes them away. Because real truth, the kind that doesn't flatter the ego, the kind that invites genuine change, is terrifying. It's not gentle, it shakes things. And that shaking isn't always welcome, especially for someone who's built a stable life atop unspoken stories, hidden fears, and well-rehearsed roles. When you arrive and stir that stillness, the initial response isn't always gratitude. Often it's retreat. When someone flees after experiencing something deep with you, they're not running from you. They're running from the mirror you held up. They're running from the sudden awareness that they are not as complete, as composed, as whole as they believed themselves to be. You didn't create that gap, you simply revealed it. And that revelation, it lingers. It follows them, not as an obsession, but as a quiet voice that begins speaking in moments they once enjoyed without question. Now even peace feels different. Something's been moved, dislodged. And while they might try to revert to how things were, the soul doesn't operate like a switch that can be turned off. It yearns for what it felt again. Not necessarily you, but the state you awakened, the clarity, the truth, the unavoidable truth, transformation and purpose. But self-knowledge isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it begins with crisis, with contradiction, with the sudden presence of someone who disrupts everything you thought you had figured out. That's what you were, not an answer, but a question. And questions that truly matter are rarely easy to sit with. They may silence you, block you, avoid places where they might encounter your name or voice, or even the thought of you. But avoidance is never healing, it's only postponement. Because eventually, they will return to what was stirred. The soul doesn't forget what cracked it open. It doesn't let you pretend it never happened. So, if they pulled away, if they vanished, if they made you feel like your depth was too much, it wasn't. It was precisely what their soul needed. But what the soul needs and what the mind is ready for are rarely the same. That's not on you, that's their journey. And perhaps one day they'll return. Not for closure, not to rewind, but because they've finally reached a place where they can face what they saw in you, and more importantly, what they saw in themselves because of you. Socrates believed that an unexamined life is not worth living. But examining one's life requires courage. A courage most aren't ready for until something or someone appears and makes it impossible to avoid. That someone might have been you. And that kind of presence doesn't vanish with distance. It lives on, quietly shaping them from the inside out. In Jungian psychology, the psyche doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, feelings, images, and patterns that the conscious mind often ignores. That's where you reside now, not as a name or a face, but as a symbol in their inner world. You became more than a person, you became a presence, something they carry even in your absence. They won't always understand it, they may not even notice it at first. But suddenly, you're there, showing up in ways that seem completely unrelated to you. In the lyrics of a song they didn't choose, in the scent of a place you've never visited, in moments of stillness that feel familiar for inexplicable reasons. That's not coincidence. That's how the unconscious attempts to process what the mind cannot comprehend. You didn't leave a memory, you left a myth, a symbol of something deeper, of something unspoken that their soul wasn't ready to name. And the strange part, the more they resist it, the stronger it becomes. Jung said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. The energy of your presence doesn't diminish just because they try to forget it. It actually grows, taking new forms, attaching itself to dreams, metaphors, and fragments of thought. They might try to rationalize it, attributing it to timing or projection or emotional confusion. But logic doesn't dissolve symbols, it only delays their integration. Because the psyche doesn't care about what makes sense, it cares about wholeness. And when someone has encountered a symbol of their own shadow, their longing, or their unlived truth, it won't let go. Not because it's romantic, but because it's necessary. The enduring symbol, a catalyst for growth. That's what you became necessary. Not to their daily routine, not to their plans, but to their growth. You awaken something dormant, something they now must confront. Not you as a person, but you as a trigger, a turning point, a mirror reflecting everything they needed to face but weren't ready to see. Plato spoke of how the soul remembers beauty, not just physical beauty, but the kind that aligns with something eternal within us. He believed that when we encounter true beauty, it stirs the memory of truth. That's what your presence did. It stirred something not on the surface, but in the very structure of who they thought they were. And symbols, true ones, don't disappear, they evolve, they change shape, they reappear until they're finally understood. When someone avoids confronting what a symbol reveals, it doesn't vanish. It simply waits quietly until life brings them to their knees, and they can no longer avoid it. You didn't seek this role. You didn't script the impact you would have. You were simply being real, present. And that honesty transformed you into a symbol of something far grander than yourself. Now they see you in silence, feel you in their own restlessness. And perhaps they won't admit it, perhaps they'll never utter a word, but their soul already knows. You became part of their unfolding, not out of desire, but out of necessity. And that's the kind of presence that doesn't fade, it transforms. It digs roots in the unconscious. Because once a symbol has been born in someone's psyche, it becomes part of their personal myth. And myths don't vanish, they're lived, they're wrestled with, and eventually they're integrated. As Carl Jung once said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And sometimes that journey begins with someone who didn't come to stay, but came to awaken. The unforgettable imprint, beyond affection to activation. Have you ever tried to forget someone, only to feel them even more vividly the harder you tried to push them away? You distract yourself, fill your days with noise, surround yourself with new faces. But there they are, still appearing in the quiet moments. Not because you want them there, but because something in you remembers. Not just the person, but the shift they caused. That's what happens when a connection moves past the surface and touches something far deeper. It becomes more than a memory, it becomes part of you. That's the truth about genuine energetic connection. It doesn't ask for permission, it doesn't obey the rules of logic or time. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." That transformation doesn't always manifest as a relationship. Sometimes it appears as a question that refuses to stop repeating itself inside your mind. A strange blend of longing and clarity, of an absence that still feels alive. Soul energy doesn't respond to commands. You can't force it to shut down simply because you've deemed it inconvenient. It doesn't follow your plans. It follows the deeper structure of your being. And when someone has entered that space, they don't just pass through, they imprint, they integrate, they become part of your internal landscape, like a melody that lingers after the music ends. You may continue with your life, you might never speak to them again, you might even convince yourself you've moved on. But inside, something still orbits the presence of what they represented. Not their surface traits, not their smile, not their voice, but the energy that accompanied them, the feeling they awakened in you. That's what endures, not affection, but activation. The lasting transformation. A new lens. Plato once described this kind of resonance as the soul's memory of wholeness. He believed that when we recognize something powerful in another person, it's not because we're meeting them for the first time, but because our soul remembers them from somewhere far deeper than this moment. That familiarity, the strange kind that makes no sense yet feels undeniable, isn't accidental. It's a signal that something meaningful has occurred. And the most surprising part, that connection might not even have been dramatic. It may not have been full of intensity or fireworks. Sometimes it's subtle, a conversation that felt too short, a presence that lingered longer than it should have. But even in its simplicity, it left a mark. Because what they awakened in you wasn't about them. It was about a part of yourself you hadn't been in touch with. That's the real story. It's not just about missing someone, it's about what they revealed. And when someone reveals a truth about you, when their presence draws you closer to something honest and raw inside yourself, that's not easily erased. Not because you're holding on, but because what they stirred continues to grow. The transformation they initiated in you keeps unfolding, even in their absence. Aristotle said that we are what we repeatedly do, and when someone shifts what we begin to repeat, how we think, feel, or perceive the world, they shape a new version of us. That kind of influence is rarely loud, but it's lasting. Because when your inner world begins to change, even subtly, you start to see everything around you through a new lens. And the one who triggered that change becomes a reference point, a quiet marker of when things began to shift. So no, it wasn't just chemistry, it wasn't just timing. It was something deeper. It was resonance at the level of the soul. And once the soul has been touched like that, forgetting becomes impossible. Not because you're stuck in the past, but because the past has taken root in the present. And whether they ever return or not, whether you speak of them or keep it to yourself, their presence lives on in the transformation they left behind. The uncomfortable return seeking clarity. Not romance, sometimes they return. Not for romance, not because they want to pick up where things left off. They return because something inside them never fully left you. It's not always love they're pursuing, it's clarity, not about you, but about themselves. Because your presence didn't just stir feelings, it stirred awareness. And awareness doesn't sit still. There are moments in life when we meet someone, and without realizing it, they become a mirror, not a mirror of who we are now, but of who we could become if we stopped running from ourselves. You didn't just make them feel seen, you made them feel exposed, not in a painful or dramatic way, but in a quiet, piercing way that lingers long after the moment has passed. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But in your presence, they may have caught a glimpse of what that truly looks like, not perfection, but honesty. A kind of emotional nakedness they weren't accustomed to. And when someone has spent years building layers to survive, layers of logic, strength, detachment, meeting someone who cuts straight through that can feel both jarring and magnetic, they might have walked away, disappeared without a proper reason, or closed the door before they could fully understand why they opened it in the first place. But distance doesn't equate to detachment. Sometimes, stepping away is the only way they know how to process what you triggered. Because what you brought up in them wasn't light. It was something buried, something waiting. The echo of remembrance, a deeper layer. Plato believed that learning is a process of remembering, that the soul already knows, and we simply awaken that knowing. That's what your presence did. It didn't teach them something new. It helped them remember something real, a deeper layer of themselves, one they had long forgotten how to access. And that memory now echoes inside them, not always with joy, sometimes with discomfort, but it echoes. So when they return, if they do, it's not always with the language you expect. It may not sound like apologies or clear confessions. Sometimes it looks like hesitation, a quiet message, a vague check-in. They aren't asking for you. They're asking if the door to their own reflection is still there. And here's the truth: whether you let them back in or not, your role in their story is already complete. You were the spark, the disruption, the invitation to depth. That moment in time when everything they thought they understood about themselves cracked. Just a little. That doesn't need to culminate in a relationship. It already fulfilled its purpose. Aristotle said that the energy of the mind is the essence of life. And sometimes, your energy awakens something in someone that their mind had kept locked away. You didn't push. You didn't try to change them. You simply showed up as you were. And that was enough to shift their emotional architecture. Now they're left with the weight of what they felt and the realization that they can't feel it. They may never find the words for it, but they'll carry it in how they navigate new connections, in what they begin to seek, in what they no longer tolerate. Because once someone has experienced a connection that penetrates to the soul, surface level won't satisfy anymore. And whether they find their way back to you or not, the truth remains you left them better than you found them. Not because you saved them, but because you reminded them there was something inside worth saving. Something raw, something honest, something real. Some connections don't come to stay, they come to awaken. And once they do, nothing within us remains the same. If this stirred something in you, there's a reason. Let it unfold. Let it lead you deeper. There's another video on the screen now that I think your soul is ready for. Take your time, but don't ignore the pull. Thank you for being here and for being part of Stoic Journal. We'll meet again when the moment calls for it.